So it's like there's a clock ticking away. There's a couple of reasons for that. I talked to you about the telomeres getting shorter, and there are a couple of types of cells that reset that by restoring the telomeres. The first one are cancer cells. Cancer cells are effectively immortal. There's one case of a woman who died in the 1950s, and they illegally sampled her cancer cells, and they're still alive and healthy today. I think I told y'all that story, didn't I? Henrietta Lack?
I don't think so.
Y'all want to hear that one?
As long as it's not derogatory.
It's not derogatory, it's a sad state in our nation's history.
I know, I think I,
You might know it. A woman by the name of Henrietta Lacks went to Johns Hopkins University Medical Center in the 1950s with diagnosis of cervical cancer. If you know cervical cancer, perhaps you know that's something that is routinely done in checkups today, but unfortunately for her, her cancer was quite advanced and she ended up dying from it. The doctor that took the sample, the biopsy, kept it and grew it in the lab. And kept growing it in the lab and kept growing it in the lab. Not because he was, being malicious or some Nazi, but because he's interested in cancer, being cured. But what happened was he never got Henrietta Lack's permission to keep the biopsy. He never got her family's permission. And he never bothered to let people know where he got it. Ms. Lax was poor and she was black. And I think you can see why that is a problem. The story eventually came out in the late 80s, early 90s, and what they decided to do, her family, by that point, the cells had been donated to so many different labs around the world. They were the gold standard for cancer research. They're called HeLa cells, capital H, little e, capital L, little a, after the first letters of her name. And I've actually worked with them. Like I said, they're just pretty much the gold standard. So what they decided to do was allow the researchers to continue to use these cell lines because they're so valuable for research. But at the same token, they acknowledge that this was done at a time when we were a little bit less enlightened about things. It was done in what many people would consider an unethical way. And that they hope that people will recognize that this is a sacrifice that she made to a certain degree, and that something good can come from it, which I think is about as good an outcome as you could hope for. And those cells, like I said, they're effectively immortal. The other are embryos. This is what makes embryos so useful. Not just the fact they're totipotent, but they're effectively immortal. There's an enzyme called telomerase. telomerase. It restores the telomeres. And it gets turned on in embryos and cancer cells. And as to how and why it gets turned on in specifically only those types of cells, if you can answer that, you've got the cure for cancer, may have a cure for, or may have the cure for aging, as in biological immortality, the Nobel Prize of yours, and probably any other thing you care to know. It's just one of those mysteries we don't fully understand. Everybody clear on that? Yes, ma'am.
What does it restore?
The telomeres, T-E-L-O-M-E-R-E. The telomeres are just the very ends or tips of the chromosomes. And I'm simplifying it a fair amount, and I'm not doing that because I'm trying to insult you all, but it's just because this isn't a cell biology class. We really don't need to get hardcore with that. The other reason, why do we age? Well, believe it or not, it's probably because of something that keeps you alive. I told you about the rule of three, right? 3 months without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without what? Oxygen specifically. Oxygen is one of the most reactive elements, period. If I set a piece of iron out on that window ledge, and we come back 1 week from today on next Monday, is it still gonna look just like it does, nice and shiny? What's it gonna have on it? Rust. It's gonna oxidize simply by being out there in the air. A lot of metals are very reactive with oxygen. Sodium is so reactive that you cannot store it in open air. If you have a jar of pure elemental sodium, you actually have to put a layer of oil on top of it to keep it from reacting with the oxygen. It's so reactive, if you throw a chunk of it in, it will explode and blow up a toilet bowl. Not that I speak from experience, of course. But you get an idea of what I mean when I say reactive. Do you think that's doing your cells any good? That oxygen is supplying you with ATP. We saw that already, didn't we? We talked about catabolism and breaking down sugar and making ATP. But it's also reacting with the proteins in your cells, breaking them down. It's reacting with the DNA, it's degrading it, and it's basically contributing a lot of overall damage. I just want everybody to understand, we as biological organisms are not immune to that second law of thermodynamics. Remember I told you about that? Entropy increases. I didn't?
No.
Y'all let me get away with all this stuff.
Are you recording this?
Yeah, I'm recording this. Assuming my battery doesn't run down, which, who knows?
You need a charger?
No, I've got one. But given my choice between plugging up the tablet I use to record the lectures or the one that I listen to my audiobooks on the way home, I'm doing the audiobooks. I'm joking with you guys. So everybody with me? 2 laws of thermodynamics. I guess we do need to cover these. The first one says you cannot destroy or create energy. You cannot create or destroy energy. And that's actually a very, very simple and very, very straightforward process. You can convert it from one form to another, but there's just a finite amount of it out there. Is that clear to everybody? We use chemical energy, don't we? We take in sugar, we break it down, we produce ATP. Where do we get the chemical energy? Well, ultimately, we get it from plants. We either eat the plants directly or we eat the cow which ate the plant, right? Where did the plant get that energy from? Somebody raise their hand and tell me. Sun. Radiant electromagnetic energy. We convert radiant energy to chemical energy to chemical energy, chemical energy to chemical energy. We use it. See where I'm going with this? I just want you to understand we follow the same rules as non-living systems. The second one is entropy increases. Entropy increases. A lot of people don't know what that means.
How do you spell entropy?
E-N-T-R-O-P-Y. Entropy is sometimes referred to as disorder. Disorder. And what it amounts to is the universe as a whole is trending towards a lower energy state. It is trending towards a lower energy state. What's easier, for me to stack up a series of blocks or for my little niece to knock them over?
Nothing.
Knock them over, right? You see why I'm having to expend energy to organize? So what the second law of thermodynamics means is if you're organizing something, you're putting order into a system, you're doing it at the expense of increasing disorder somewhere else. Is that clear to everybody? Y'all want to know what heat is? You hear the term, but what is actual heat?
Energy.
Huh?
Energy.
It's the flow of energy from one system to another. That's all.
Whose law is it? Who developed? Who's credited with the?
I'll be completely honest, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head. For that, I apologize because I thought I had already gone over this, so I'm not really prepared to lecture on the laws of thermodynamics. I'm having to go off my internal knowledge. I'm not combat ready.
I'm just curious.
I'm sure if you Google who formulated laws of thermodynamics, it'll come up. The bottom line is I purchased this nice cold soda just before class. Is there a temperature differential between the soda and my hand? Which is warmer, my hand or the soda?
Your hand.
My hand. So energy is going to flow from my hand into the soda bottle. That's heat. Does everybody see that? That's all it is. Eventually, the soda bottle will be the same temperature as background, right? You see how that goes? Will heat flow then? No, because it's now part of the background. I think that's kind of obvious, isn't it? And that really, like I said, it may seem like an oversimplification of the laws of thermodynamics, but I think it's a good enough one we can understand it. Is everybody cool with that? Good. I'm glad I don't have to get into the physics of this. I think Maxwell may have been the one now that I'm thinking about it. I think his first name is James. Yes.
Question. So when you catch on fire, are you overflowing with energy, or is it?
What would you think? Which is at a higher temperature, my flaming body or the air? It's a good question. My flaming body.
Yeah.
So the energy is transferring from my body to the air, the atmosphere as a whole. Am I going to be enough of a heat source to warm up the entire planet?
No.
No. So eventually, we run out of fuel, my body gets turned to ash, the fire goes out. We have contributed a little bit to global warming, but not a significant. That answer your question?
Yeah.
And it's not a bad one because what you're thinking of is the chemical energy that's contained in my body is being used up, oxidizing with the air, which is what's causing the flames.
So does that mean that all the energy there is and ever has been was created in the initial Big Bang?
Yeah.
Okay.
And eventually, it will lead to what we call the heat death of the universe, which is a state of maximum entropy. What that says is that all of the heat will have equalized everywhere. Everything will be the same temperature. And I'm not going down that path or getting into any of the deep philosophical or theological discussions, because that's physics. It's a little bit beyond the scope of things. But I want y'all to understand, we use chemical energy that originates from radiant energy. We all have to get it from somewhere else, and we lose most of it as waste. The general rule of thumb is 10% per level, 10% per level. So if I had 100 units of energy from the sun, the plant is only going to use 10 of those units. It's lost 90 units. I eat the plant, I lose 9 of those 10 units I acquire from the plant as heat. Just waste heat off my body. I get use of 1. You see what I mean? That's why metabolism is so important, because It's the sum total of all the chemical reactions in the body.
You lose 10% per level.
I did talk about metabolism, didn't
I think-
Briefly.
I think you said that was gonna be chapter 5.
I? Okay. So we're now where we can talk about it. Metabolism. Sum total of all the chemical reactions in the body, or the sum total of all chemical reactions in a living cell. We need energy, don't we? We're animals, so we are going to get that energy through one of the two pathways. The pathway we're going to talk about is catabolism, catabolic, C-A-T-A-B-O-L-I-S-M. It means breaking down. I get myself a nice garden salad. My body begins the catabolic process of breaking down the bigger molecules into smaller molecules. Those small molecules are at a lower energy state. Everybody see how that goes? We call that burning sugar, for example. So catabolism is breaking down.
One more time, I'm sorry. Metabolism is the sum total of all.
Chemical reactions. Catabolism is exergonic, E-X-E-R-G-O-N-I-C. Energy releasing. We break those bonds to release that energy, and we use that energy for whatever purpose we need. Every living thing undergoes catabolism. The reverse of that is anabolism, or anabolic reactions. These are building up. You start small and you build. You make something bigger. You may have heard the term anabolic steroids. If you ever get a chance, read the book Juiced. Talks about all those baseball players in the late 90s and their home runs. You know how they look like normal guys one season, the next season they look like the Incredible Hulk? That's because they were taking anabolic steroids to build muscle mass. Anabolism, therefore, is endergonic. You're putting energy into the system. All living things do that as well. Endergonic. For example, I'm drinking sugar, right? I'm probably going to get more calories out of this than I use. So is my body going to just store up those sugar molecules? What it's going to do is it's going to use the energy from them to build fat, because fat is the preferred energy storage for long term. That's an anabolic process, right? That's why I'm getting bigger and growing this way instead of that way. So is everybody okay with that? You comfortable? Humans use, well, every living thing. You're rolling your eyes. What's wrong?
Nothing.
Feel free.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Just trying to process.
It's a bit difficult too, I know, because we're summing up a very complex procedure here in just a few sentences. But trust me, we do not want to get into the biochemistry of this. I've taught that too. I still have nightmares about that. So most people understand the idea we're talking about energy, right? Whether we're building up to store it in a big molecule or breaking the big molecule down to release it, all of that together is metabolism. What do we do with the energy we use? Well, here is where we're going to have to introduce something called ATP. ATP. Now, the analogy I'm going to use worked a lot better 20 or 30 years ago when I first started teaching, because back then, people actually still used this thing. I'm going to show you something from a dark age. I don't know if y'all have ever even seen this. It's called cash. You exchange pieces of paper for goods and services. What can I use this cash for? Could I use this to put gas in my vehicle on the way home? Not a lot.
Yeah.
But I could, right? I could combine it with a few of those other dollars. Could I get myself a wings double?
Most certainly.
Most certainly. Could I stop by the pharmacy and get my medication with it?
Probably need
Probably
to-
it is.
I had a lot more of those. But you get an idea. Cash is usable for everything that requires money, isn't it? Even as little as you can buy with a dollar, if I were to hand this to Isaiah, I guarantee he wouldn't turn it down. But see where I'm going with? It is the universal form of energy, ATP. The cell uses only ATP. It does not use anything but ATP. And that's where I like the cash analogy. Now, I know nowadays we've got cards. Everybody uses their card. I know there's even some way you can get your phones to do this. One of the most amusing things I ever saw in my lifetime was somebody standing in front of a gas pump doing this with their phone. I thought this was some new TikTok challenge or something. So one of my students said, no, she was just using iPay. I said, what's iPay? And then the whole class laughed at me, and I guess it's some Apple thing.
I think they even make like pieces of jewelry now, like a ring or something that you can use for
It
that.
wouldn't surprise me.
You can use your watch.
Or your watch, yeah.
Imagine my surprise when I bought myself a smartwatch and it started beeping and buzzing at me. And I started getting texts on it. I just wanted a watch. Can't buy one nowadays. Gotta be internet connected. Anyway, you see where I'm going with that. Without the cash, without the preferred form of energy, you don't get to survive. Make sure you get that in your notes. No ATP, no survival. The cell has to have ATP only. The old saying goes, in God we trust, all others pay cash. Only cash, no checks, no watches.
What's a check?
No iPay, no Apple Pay, no nothing. Okay. So the cell has to make ATP. It has to make ATP. That's the critical function. Most cells do this in the mitochondria. This occurs in the mitochondria. And I'm going to give you an overview of just one pathway, okay? Is that okay for everyone? We're going to call it glycolysis. Glycolysis. Glyco meaning sugar, lysis meaning to split. We're going to split a sugar molecule. Glycolys, one word, glycolysis. Sugar's taken in by the cell. It's floating around out here in the cytoplasm. We literally split that glucose molecule in two. Everybody cool with that? We take those two chunks and we stick them into the mitochondria. There, they undergo what's called the citric acid cycle. And yes, you do need to know that. The citric acid cycle.
Is it one word?
Citric, C-I-T-R-I-C, one word. Acid, one word. Cycle, one word.
So it splits the sugar molecule in two and puts it in the mitochondria.
Where it undergoes the citric acid cycle. And I promise you, at some point in time, I will probably screw up and call that the Krebs cycle, after the guy it was originally named after, but we're not supposed to name things after people, so we don't call it the citric acid cycle. But if you hear me call it the Krebs cycle, you know what I mean. And if you call it the Krebs cycle, I won't ding you points. Yes, ma'am.
What's the citric,
Huh?
what's the citric acid cycle's function? Like would we write out?
I'm getting there.
Okay, making sure.
Completely breaks down the molecule into carbon dioxide and water. It completely breaks down those two little chunks into CO2 and water. In the process, we've generated two things. Number one, we've gotten a little ATP. It's not a bad return. If I gave you $1 at the end of class, or if you gave me $1 at the end of class and I gave you $2 or you gave me $1 at the beginning, I gave you $2 at the end, will you take that?
Yeah.
It's not a bad return to sit here and listen 75 minutes, is it?
I mean, that's a
Huh?
good return on your investment. About 100%
But
return on your
it's not a significant return. I want you to understand that. From the citric acid cycle, you don't get a lot of ATP. You got just a little bit. And you had to put some in to start the process to break it up, right? So we had to invest some energy. The other thing we've got is a big pile of high energy electrons. Did anybody ever play with a slinky growing up?
Mhm.
You know, did you do the little trick, make it go down the stairs?
Mustard or
You
wood?
push it and it automatically goes walking down. That's because it's going down an energy gradient. When you start at the top of the stairs, it's high energy. When you get to the bottom of the stairs, it's low energy. It's called an energy gradient, going from high to low. What we're going to do is we're going to pass those electrons through an electron transport chain. An electron transport chain. And at each step, it loses energy. And in the meantime, we're setting up another gradient. This one of protons. We are going to pack a space full of protons. When those protons come back in to the middle of the mitochondria, they turn a little wheel that makes ATP. So step 1 is glycolysis, step 2 is citric acid cycle, step 3 is electron gradient, step 4 is making ATP. Is everybody okay with that? Your book goes into a bit more detail than this. It actually shows you what's going on in the molecular level. But I don't want to get lost in the weeds. I want everybody to understand. That is an ongoing, continuous process. And you don't get back double the energy you got. You get back anywhere between 8 to 12 times the energy you invested. That's a really good rate of return, isn't it? If I could told you every single time you did this, you increased your money by a factor of 10, I think we'd all be sinking bucks. What could you use that new ATP for? Anything. To break down more sugar, to make protein, to get bigger, to reproduce. Am I going too fast for you?
No.
I apologize if it seemed like this is a difficult concept or a lot. It is. Of all of the things in biology, this is my least favorite topic.
What's your most favorite?
Huh?
What's your most favorite?
Genetics.
Genetics.
Wait until we get into genetics and evolution. You all will have to rein me in.
Why do you like genetics so much?
Because how do you manage to take enough information to make a human and pack it into a single cell? And then unpack it to make another human that's similar to but completely distinct from the original. I mean, it just. I told you about the Hayflick limit and how you could, not get the Nobel Prize. You could write your own prize for that.
Yeah.
You figured this out, and you figured out probably one of the fundamental mysteries of the universe. And I just like learning things. It's always new. And thanks for asking a fun question for a change.
Of course.
Not that you don't normally answer fun questions, but I don't normally get ones like that. Why do you like it? Well, I'm glad you asked.
So, you being big into genetics, is it not strange that how, all other mammals have, 48 chromosomes, but humans only have, or,
It's completely variable. And in fact, how many sets of chromosomes do humans have? Remember I said you get one from mom and one from dad, and you're not the product of either set, but the interaction between the two. Well, did you know there are some animals and plants that have 4 sets? There are some that have 6. Anybody like wheat? Bread? Bread wheat has 6 sets of chromosomes. There's some species of corn that are octoploid. They have 8. There's a frog that's dodecaploid. It has 12 sets.
That poor frog.
Huh?
That poor frog gotta deal with 12 sets of those.
What on earth happened to get that? That's the kind of question I like about genetics. And don't let me go any further down this pathway or we will never get back on target. So does everybody understand the process I just laid out for you? We call this whole thing cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. Now, I just told you about glycolysis to show you one out of many pathways. Can you break down proteins for food, for energy? Yes. There's a different pathway that feeds into the citric acid cycle for breaking down proteins. There's a different way to feed in breaking down fats and lipids. You see where I'm going? I just want you all to understand one of them, to realize all of this feeds into the citric acid cycle, which is then used to make ATP. Question?
Why is it called the citric acid cycle?
Because it's one of the components of the cycle. I didn't think you wanted me to call it the tricarboxylic acid cycle.
But it doesn't have anything to do with actual citric acid?
Citric acid is one of the components.
Oh, okay.
But like I said, I could call it the tricarboxylic acid cycle. Would you prefer that? The Krebs cycle? It's not a bad question. It's just I'm trying to make sure I don't get you guys just beaten down by the sheer wealth of information. I had one professor who absolutely just literally abused us mentally with cellular respiration. After he did that, I said, I'm never going to do this to my students ever, because I don't think it's needed. You understand that you have a cycle at the center of it, don't you? You understand you can feed into that cycle at different points, don't you? What you get out of it, ATP. Everybody comfortable with that? Ultimately, all those electrons we're sending down the chain, oxygen is just waiting there to grab them. That's why we need oxygen to survive. Straightforward enough? I think so. The key here is oxygen. Cellular respiration requires it. By having access to it, we are able to make ATP in a very efficient manner. We're able to do it very efficiently. And that's what gives us enough energy to do all the things we do.
One more time, cellular respiration requires O2, and
It's what efficiency is the reason. We make a lot of ATP. You all may have heard of fermentation. Anybody like fresh bread right out of the oven? Nice. It's got that nice yeasty aroma to it, maybe a little bit of alcohol. Now, some of you, I know not you all because you're all underage, like the fermentation process for the other byproduct, not the CO2, but the alcohol. But joking aside, beer and bread for most of humanity's history is what has provided humans with most of their calories. Did you realize that? The thing about fermentation is it does not require oxygen. You get to make ATP without oxygen. What you may not be aware of is humans have the ability to do a slightly different form. It's not the traditional fermentation that involves yeast and alcohol, but it's something that's called lactic acid fermentation. Anybody here ever had a really intense workout and the next day you feel the burn? I think just most of us nodding, hands going up, yeah. That's because of lactic acid fermentation. What happens is you're out there running a marathon. Your heart is beating as fast as it can, isn't it? So you're circulating the blood. You're breathing in as fast and deeply as you can. So you're getting oxygen in. You still need more energy than you're capable of producing via cellular respiration. Is that clear to everyone? So your body turns on the backup. Lactic acid fermentation starts making additional ATP for your muscles. That lactic acid builds up. It's a toxin. They always tell you to hydrate. Well, that's to help flush that stuff out. That's why you feel the burn the next day. The key here is it's a backup that only supplies additional energy during high demand. It cannot replace the primary system. And by the primary system, I mean cellular respiration. So can you live without breathing? No. Your body just cannot produce enough ATP via lactic acid fermentation to keep you alive. You have to have oxygen. Everybody cool? What do you get? Page and a half?
page and a half, full page.
Page that.
Cellular respiration in under 2 pages. Dr. Ross would not believe it possible. Dr. Ross thought that you had to have it in probably 2 years' worth of lecture. That's the only thing that man talked about.
I also ride kind of big, so.
Well, I know everybody does. I just have a visual in mind that I try not to, because I don't want you overwhelmed by too much information. And that is how everything obtains its ATP, okay? And I do mean everything, from the smallest cell to the most complex and big organism. So any questions over that? All right. So now let's go back to the cell and talk about the cell in general. Number one, there are 2 different types of cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are eukaryotes, eukaryotes. Prokaryotes come in 2 flavors. Archaea, and bacteria.
Archaea is,
And bacteria.
Archaea, how you spell that?
Archaea. Affectionately known henceforward as the Archies. Eukaryotes come in 4 flavors. Protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Protists, fungi, plants, and animals.
Is fungi spelled with a J or a G?
Fell with a G. He's a fun guy. Ha, ha, ha. There's a fungus among us. You don't want me going out on fungi hunts. My mycology professor thought he was a comedian. Mycologist studied fungi. I heard more bad fungus puns than I ever. Is everybody with me? These are the 6 main divisions of life.
I was gonna, say, does this make, you kinda answered it though, but this kinda makes the, kingdoms.
In fact, they are called kingdoms. Everybody okay with that? We all clear? Now, the differences between the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes, there are 3 of them that I want you to know. Number 1, prokaryotes always have a cell wall. Always. Underline that word. Number 2, prokaryotes are generally much smaller. Generally. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but if we were making a comparison on a general term, generally it's about 10 times, eukaryotes are about 10 times the size of a prokaryote, so much bigger. And the third, and this is the most important one, prokaryotes lack membrane-bound organelles. They do not have membrane-bound organelles. Well, what the heck is a membrane-bound organelle? Basically a nucleus and some other things. Things like a nucleus and mitochondria. Is everybody with me? Now let's talk just very quickly a little bit. The difference between archaea and bacteria. Archaeas are extremophiles. That means they love extreme conditions. Anywhere you find an extreme environment, you'll have archaeas growing there. Hot springs where you got boiling water, archaeas. The Dead Sea, did you know it's not quite dead? Archaeas. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, southern Peru, where you get like less than an inch of rain a century, archaeas. You get an idea here? Frozen in a glacier, archaeas. That's really the only thing I want you to understand, is they're just found in extreme environments. And believe it or not, even though they're both prokaryotes, the archaeas are as different from bacteria as either of them are from eukaryotes. They're not closely related at all. The only thing they have in common is that they are prokaryotes. That's not to say that bacteria aren't tough. Y'all like my little side stories. Y'all want a cool one here? In 1966, the United States launched a robotic probe to the moon. It was called Surveyor, and it was the third mission of the Surveyor series. It landed on the moon, had a little TV camera, took some pictures. Battery ran out, it died. It sat there for 2.5 years, 30 months. Now think about what conditions are like on the moon. The temperature ranges from about -200 below to about 200 above. 14 days of daylight followed by 14 days of darkness. Is there any oxygen on the moon? Water? It's a pretty rough place to be, isn't it? 2.5 years after Surveyor 3 landed, Apollo 12 landed at the same site. That was one of the 6 main missions. They took some samples, and one of the things they did was they hopped over to the robotic probe and they cut off the robotic arm with the TV camera because they wanted to see what the effects were of something sitting out on the moon for 2.5 years. When they got back, they took a swab and swabbed the insulation on the TV camera, put it out on an agar plate, and you see the little petri plates, and guess what? Bacteria grew. Streptococcus. What they figured happened was that strep managed to survive the decontamination procedure, the launch, 2.5 years in a vacuum with 400-degree temperature extremes, radiation, no shielding, and all the way back until they plated it out. Pretty tough. So I want you to understand bacteria are tough too. So everybody okay with this? What I've got for you next is this thing's still recording.